Today is July 15th, 2007. I am Jessica Clark. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Lair, North Dakota. To start with, can you state your full name?
Gorden R. Werth,
And where were you born, Gordon?
4 miles south of Lair.
Okay. When were you born?
September 1st, 1931.
Did you ever hear an interesting story about your birth?
Well, not really, other than I was, I guess, way overweight when I weighed 13 and a half pounds.
Your poor mother.
Yeah, it about took her life, I guess.
Do you know if a midwife was present or was a doctor?
Dr. Merklein,
Were you born on the farm?
right.
So the doctor came out to the farmstead. Can you share with us one of your earliest childhood memories?
Man. I guess the first childhood memory that I have is starting school, grade school. Before that, I mean, I really don't have anything that's outstanding or anything like that.
How old were you when you started school?
6.
What school did you attend?
Lowenthal School, District number 10, School number 4.
How far was that from your home?
Oh, I'd say about 3/4 of a mile.
Oh my goodness, how did you get
My-
there?
Walk,
Even
no-
in the...
no bus. In the wintertime, we would usually go with a sled or the neighbor. My cousins lived just 1/4 of a mile from our place, and they would, their dad would hook up the horses in the sled, and then they would come by our place, and my brother and I, we would jump in and go with them. And then as time went on, my brother was 6 years older, so he graduated from grade school, and so it was I had a cousin that was a year older, and then we would go back and forth with the sled.
What was your brother's name?
Harold,
And what was your cousin's name that you would...
Leo Flemmer.
So, was it the Flemmers that lived close to the...
Yeah, 1/4 of a mile. But then there was another family that lived another, I suppose, a mile east of there, and their dad would bring them over as far as the Flemmer's place, and then that was like a school bus almost.
And what were their names?
Lang,
So how many kids attended your school?
we had as high as 23 one year, but then that was the height, and then it started dwindling down. And
I'm guessing that since it was a country school, it was a one-room schoolhouse?
Yeah.
Can you describe what it looked like for us?
well, as close as I can remember, there was 2 doors that came into the school, and there was a kind of like a little closet, or not really a closet, but a hallway where you could take off your coats and caps, and one side was for the girls and one side was for the boys. And then you'd come into the room, and that's where the desks and library and whatever went with school was in there, then, including the teacher.
So did you have a lot of books when you were growing
No.
up?
There was always a limited supply, and a lot of times they were outdated old books. And we did get new workbooks every year as we progressed in different grades. And that time there was no such a thing that the school board bought the books. The parents provided the books.
What other types of school supplies did your parents have to buy for you?
Everything: paper, pencils, colors, paints if we had any, and it was everything was supplied by the. I can remember. I think it was in the fourth grade. Uh, we had a copy of an arithmetic book, but it had been used for so long that it all came apart. And I can still remember my dad laid out all the pages on the floor, and then he took a needle and thread and went through and sewed them so that I had an arithmetic book.
So the workbooks, would you write in them or would you write
Yes,
on no?
workbooks. And then we finally got down to the seventh and eighth grade. Then we would have uh, tests. I guess they were put out by the state of North Dakota, and then we would have a review, a time of reviewing, and it then at certain, I forget if it was right during school or after school, but anyhow we wrote our seventh and eighth grade exams then, and we passed them. At least I did, and I think everybody else did too.
So the seventh and eighth grade exams, how long would they take you to take one of those exams?
Well, they had I think about 3 or 4 subjects for the seventh grade, and then about that many for the eighth grade too. So, I mean, there was a a year in between there.
Um, did you take them while you were at school?
Yeah.
What would the other kids that weren't in those grades be
They
doing?
they would have a couple of days off or whatever. So I mean, it was just the upper grades that were there and took the tests.
Um,
They had a back in those days. I don't know if they still do, but they had a book that was called Course of Study, and that came from the state of North Dakota, and it was divided into 8 sections. The first year you were to accomplish so much, and then in second grade you accomplished this much, and it came by steps. And if you, I did teach school for 4 years, and if you followed the course of study, by the time you got through, and if you really insisted that your students completed the work that was provided, or that was not provided, but was expected them to do, they would come out all right. And then, of course, the the tests that we wrote, they came from the state also, and they were geared according to this course of study. So you were pretty well limited that you had to cover what.
so what subjects were covered in school when you were growing up?
What subjects?
Hmm.
Oh, reading, writing, arithmetic, spelling. Uh, then we even had a course in agriculture and health, of course, and English language, and so it was, I guess, the basics.
here. When you started school, do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Never gave it any thought.
Okay. Did you like going to school?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't always fit in with what the teachers desired I should be doing, but that was beside the point. we we had we had some good teachers, some were not so good, of course. Maybe because they stepped down on us harder. But
So when you were going to school, the teachers that you had, would you have one for more than 1 year, or did they change every year?
no, I don't think we ever had a teacher that was there more than 1 year. I don't recall any anyhow.
Um, did you have female teachers or male teachers?
Female. Never had a man teacher. They were around. I mean, there were schools that had, but we never did.
Were the teachers German, or were they other
Uh,
groups?
as far as I can remember, they were pretty well German oriented.
So could you speak German in school?
Could we? Did we dare? Not too much. I mean, it was. I don't know if it was why it was really forbidden or if it was forbidden, but I mean, you just didn't talk German. I mean, you're here to learn the English, and that was it.
So did you know English when you started school?
Oh yeah.
What did your parents think of their children getting an education?
Oh, they were. They were all for it. We went to high school.
And you grew up on a farm, right?
Yeah.
Did your older brother also go to high school?
Yeah. We went to a boarding academy, which was a whole other experience. That was at Harvey, North Dakota. It's not there anymore. They have moved to and started a school at Bismarck. But it was church oriented. We were born and raised Seventh Day Adventists, and this academy is it's a 4-year high school, and so that's where we went to school then.
So is that, did your parents have to pay for that?
Oh yes, we worked at the school, and also there was tuition that my parents paid.
What did your parents do for farm labor when you guys left?
Oh, I don't know. It just see there was 6 years difference between my brother and myself, so I guess we just kind of overlapped. And in the wintertime, there wasn't really that much to do. In the summertime, we were home. We always milked cows and had beef cattle, and my mother always had chickens and ducks and geese and all that stuff. So we there was always enough to do. Never no shortage of work.
Harvey is pretty far from the area, so how
100,
did you get up there?
150 miles. They would take us out there, take us out in the fall of the year when school started, and then we'd come home at Christmas time for a week or two, and then go back and stay there until May. We stayed in dormitories and had a boys' dormitory and a girls' dormitory, and we had roommates, but it was a whole different experience. I always say, there were a lot of kids that came from from is this going to hurt if it moves in?
You can leave it down.
That would come from they were more well-to-do than what we had. But when we came off the farm, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water, we didn't have any of those conveniences, and here we were put in that surroundings, and I just thought that was something you just couldn't explain it. I mean, it just ooh and ah every time you turn around. Of course, I was just my brother and myself, and then some years we probably had, I'd say, anywhere from 40 to 50 boys in the dormitory, and then on the other side of the campus there was about that many girls too, and then you come into these classes, and I remember our graduating class was 38 students, and here we had come from out here on the farm. There was myself and my cousin and the neighbor's girl. We started first grade together, and we graduated eighth grade. So just the three of us, that's not all that was in school, but we were our classmates, and it was
Can you,
that.
how old were you when you went up to Harvey?
Well, I'd say 6, and then 8, about 14 or 15.
Can you describe what the dormitories look like?
Yeah, the the dormitories were 3-story buildings. They had a basement on them, and then 2 stories above ground. And there was a dean's office and dean's apartment, because they usually had, especially in the boys' dormitory, they had a married couple that were uh, our deans and so on. And then the dormitory had individual rooms, and usually we had two to a room. But one year I remember we had more students than we had rooms, so then we there would be 3 in some rooms, not all of them, but
What would you bring with you when you would go up for the year?
clothes and of course the books we bought there at the school, because and then in the spring of the year we turn them back in, and the credit would stay there until you came back in the fall, and then you would apply that credit like when you came for your sophomore year, then you'd have a credit for your sophomore books, and if you didn't come back, they would pay that out. So, and it was a work and school program. I can remember we went to school in the morning. We started school at 7:30 in the morning, and by 12:30 we were out, and then we had a work program. Mostly those of us that could work on the farm, they had a farm that was connected with the school, and we would work on the farm, and the girls would work in the dining room and in the kitchen, and everybody had something to do. I mean, I don't know if it was always a paying deal, but they saw to it that we had something to do and that we wouldn't get into trouble.
Were the students up there German Russian, or were they all sorts of different ethnicities?
At the school,
Mm-hmm.
I would say it was a mixture. But originally, when the academy started, they taught German, they taught Russian, and American English.
When you went to school, did they still teach German?
No. Yes, they did. Because I took a course in first year German. That's when I learned, when I finally figured out what English was about. The course English, how that all fit together. It was.
Did you like your experience at Harvey?
I didn't the first year when I was there, and as a result, I didn't go back the second year. But then I went back when I was a junior and senior, and I was glad that I could go back.
What didn't you like about the first year?
I think the biggest thing I didn't like about it was I was away from home. I love my parents dearly.
But religious school, were there religious
Oh yes,
classes?
we had Bible class, and that was a required subject, 4 years of Bible, and it didn't hurt us a one bit.
What were some of the other classes that you took while you were there?
Oh, English 1, 2, 3, and 4, and Bible history, and of course that was with the Bible, and then American history, and I don't know. It was all of the courses that you get in regular high school, biology and chemistry and.
What were your favorite classes?
I can't really say that I had any. That was really a favorite.
So what type of pastime activities would you do while you were in Harvey?
Oh, sometime or especially in the fall of the year, we'd have ball games after supper and basketball games and tobogganing in the wintertime and go for hikes and then when winter really closed in, uh, we would push the tables all to one side in the dining room, and we would uh, the whole student body would get together and march down in the dining room and just to we'd have marches and then we'd have films in the evening once in a while and I think the two most outstanding things that as far as entertainment was concerned is we had a boys club and the girls had a girls club, and the first semester either the boys or the girls would put on a banquet and invite the other, either the girls or the boys, and then in this about halfway through the second semester then the other side would have a banquet, and we go. It was outstanding. I mean, I can still remember we had one of our boys' banquets. It was the theme like a ship. Everybody that was served meals and stuff like that were dressed up in Navy uniforms, and of course we could invite our girls, and we sat and we had supper, and it was fun. At that time, I mean, even although there were girls and boys on the campus, I mean, but it was absolutely a no-no. You did not have boyfriend and girlfriend. It was, and I can see why it had to be that way. I mean,
You know, you talk about the dining room. What did you think about eating in a dining room versus your mother's
oh
home
my,
kitchen?
that was different again. we we had assigned tables, 8 people to a table, 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, and one on each end. And though it was, I don't know, uh, I guess a regime or whatever you'd call it. The one that sat on one end, he took care of all the milk and the water, filled all the glasses with water. And if we'd run out low on milk, he'd go back to the deck and get another pitcher of milk and pass it around, or water. And on the other side, I don't know what the other side, but anyhow, everybody had something to do, and we'd come down dining room and we'd have our meals down there. And I remember when I was a freshman, one of my jobs that I had was washing kettles. They had these great big kettles, and they cook big meals, and the kettles at that time, I felt they were big enough I could crawl inside and work my way out. But it was a learning experience all the way through. I mean, and to this day, I mean, I still don't mind working. I I have a lawn mowing route in town here now. I've got 20 yards I take care of. Keeps me going, keeps me busy.
Did you, let's see here.
Oh, and the name of that school was Cheyenne River Academy, spelled with the S-H-E-Y.
Did they have, when you graduated, did they have a big graduation?
Yes,
What was that like?
that was quite an experience also. At the time when I went to school there, and I say we, I always think of my class, and they put up a new administration building, a 3-story administration building, beautiful building, and I graduated in '49. The class of '48 graduated in that building, but in they called it was a science room, and they had fixed a stage in there. But when we graduated, we were the first class to graduate in the finished building, class of '49. And we had a nice big chapel, and everything was just up to par. I mean, at that time it was really something. We were proud of it. And then we were able to help put it up. We worked with the contractor, and so it provided a lot of student labor too at the same time.
So for graduation, did your parents come up?
Oh yes.
Was there a celebration after the ceremony?
Not like they have now. No. We usually had graduation on Saturday night, and after graduation we got in the car and went home. And then in the summertime we usually had a week's session in Jamestown. We called a camp meeting, where all the church members from all across the state would gather at camp meeting time at Jamestown, and we we had chores and cows and stuff to milk, and so did my uncle. So we would take care of their chores for the first half or second half, and they would take care of ours. Everybody at that time, they would pitch tents, and everybody that came, that they would stay in those tents, and it was just like when you go on a camping trip. You take food along, and bedding and beds, and it was. Have you ever been to McElroy Park in Jamestown? It's on the same south central part of town, and that's where they would set up camp. And we'd have, back in those days, they'd have German services and also English, and then they would also provide meetings for us children, and it was a high day.
So what type of activities did they have you do during that week?
Oh, they would have, games for the young kids, but it was mostly church oriented. You'd have your different classes and so on and so forth.
So it was like a family time, the entire family would go?
Yeah, we'd go as a family, yeah.
What time of year was that? That was in the summer?
That was usually between the first of June and the middle of June, somewhere in that area. We still have that every year, but now we go to the academy at Bismarck, and then if you want to rent a room, you can rent a room and stay in the dormitories.
So when you were growing growing up, how important was religion to your family?
Very important.
What type of religious activities did you partake in as a kid besides the camp?
Oh, I don't know. You couldn't really say that there was a lot of extra activity, but they did have what they call junior camps, and that was usually at uh, northeast of Jamestown. Lake Ashtabula, I guess, is up in there someplace. I never went because we just it would have been an extra charge, and so I guess we just never went to that. But then we had our activities were with the church, and then usually on the 4th of July there'd be there's an Adventist church at Streeter, and then ours at Lair, and then one at Colum, and the three churches would get together and have a picnic and play ball and all kinds of activities. That was on the 4th of July.
So, when you were growing up, you actually had to come into town to go to church?
Yes,
How would you get to town?
with a car.
Do you remember what type of car you guys had?
Oh my! I can, I can remember my dad had an Oldsmobile. I think it was about a 1928, and then later he bought Chevrolet and Plymouth and all kinds.
So, how long would it take you to get into town?
Oh, not too long. 4 miles is not so. It wasn't such a long way. I mean, half an hour, 15, 20 minutes.
Was it possible for your dad to drive the car in the winter?
No, in the winter it was mostly horses and sled. He'd,
And how often would you go to church?
every week, if at all possible, every week. That was just the norm.
And let's see here. How long did church services last when you were growing up?
Usually from about 9:30, 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock at noon, unless there was something special going on.
When you were growing up and you were going to Lair, were they in German or were they in English?
German and English. More German, but then eventually it was English.
Can you describe what a church service back then was like? Is it the same as it is today or was it different?
Oh, I'd say pretty well still the same. We have call it Sabbath school that we have we study our lesson, and then during the week, and then then when we get together, then we have one that's a teacher. I'm one of them, and you try and get people discussing different aspects of the lesson, and so.
When you were growing up, were there things that the church frowned upon, that you were discouraged from participating?
Oh yeah. No movies, no tobacco, and coffee, and that was out. I mean, any anything on that order, like caffeine or alcohol, that was absolutely no.
Do you know when that started to change?
It hasn't changed yet.
were done with church, would your parents have like a big meal at home or something to celebrate that day?
Not really. I mean, there was. I guess I'd have to say that my mother's meals were all special.
Was your mother a good cook?
The best. No, not, I shouldn't say the best. My wife is just as good a cook. But
Smart man.
but the reason for that is she learned from my mother.
So what type of meals would your mother cook?
Oh my. I suppose, like in the morning, it usually was a hot cereal or cornflakes or whatever, and then for dinner we would uh, probably have, especially when she had spring chicken, she would fix spring chicken, and for supper it was in the summertime. I'm thinking mostly over supper time or summertime. Be vegetables out of the garden and vegetables at noon, and we never went to bed hungry. Never.
So your mother was the only woman in the house. Did she do all the cooking?
Absolutely. Not only the cooking, she worked out in the field too. I don't know, have you ever seen header stacks?
Yeah, I've seen a picture.
That was her pride and joy. She would get on those stacks and she would set them. My brother and my dad and I, we would cut the grain with the header, bring it in with the box and unload it, and she would stack the stacks. And my grandpa was the guy that did our thrashing for us. And he said, it doesn't make any difference where we go with the thrashing machine. Mary stacks are always the best.
She was a hard worker.
Absolutely. There was no such a thing that anybody was slack in working back in those days. The work was there and it had to be done. There was, well, we'll wait till the combine comes or something like that. You got in there and did your job.
What was your mother's name?
Mary
What was her maiden name?
Kranzler. That's my mother and dad on this side, and my grandpa and grandma Kranzler on that side.
Oh, how beautiful.
That was the lady in there with my grandpa there. That was his second wife. His first wife died in Russia yet, and then he got remarried. And there were three children from the first marriage, my mother, her sister, and her brother. And then they had, I guess, 6 or 7 more. And my mother always said that this lady that my grandpa married, she said she was a saint.
So, okay. I want to get this straight in my head. Your grandfather, what was his name?
Christoph Kranzler.
Okay. And his first wife
Passed away in Russia.
in Russia.
Yes.
Okay. So did he remarry his second wife before he moved?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. She came with him from Russia.
How old was your mother when they came over?
3.5, I guess. Came on the big ship.
Were you close to your grandparents when you were growing up?
I'd say about 4 miles from both of them, both my grandpa, my dad's side, and one lived south and one lived west.
Did you get to see them often?
Yeah, quite often. I mean, it was.
So, okay. Your mother's mother, what was her name? Do you know her name?
I don't remember what her mother's name was, but my grandma here was Caroline.
When you think back to Caroline, what type of a person do you remember her as?
I think if it would have come to the point, I think she'd have laid down her life for us. Because she was, like my mother said, she was a saint. She just, for many years, my grandpa was, he was sick, and not really, that he couldn't do anything or anything like that, but my grandma would always see to it that grandpa was taken care of, and she'd wait on him hand and foot. That's what you call devotion.
Your grandfather, when you think of him, what type of a grandfather was he?
He was very strict with everything that he did. I mean, it had to be just like that. And see, he was. I don't know for sure if he was ever in the Russian army or not, but the reason that they left over there was they felt that if they didn't, they would get drafted into the Russian army, and I guess that was nothing to be proud of.
Did you ever go and visit to their house and visit?
Pardon?
Did you ever go visit them at their house?
Oh yeah.
What was that like when you would visit them?
Oh, I can remember Grandma would always put on a big meal, and just, you were welcome there anytime you'd come.
Your dad's parents, you said you also knew them?
Yeah.
What were their names?
William and Magdalena.
And did they also come from Russia?
My grandpa Werth did. I don't know if. I think my grandma Werth did too. I'm not sure on that.
When you think about your grandpa on that side, what type of a grandfather was he?
Oh, I guess about the same as what my other grandpa was. But I can still remember that they used to have a big watermelon patch, and when they were just about ripe or were ripe, then he'd always call me, Gorden, let's go. Harbuza. That's watermelon. Go get some watermelons, and we go down. I'd go along with him down the patch, and then of course, he knew what he was looking for, and they were about like this, that I can remember. And oh, were they ever good? And they had muskmelons and all kinds of stuff like that. He was, at that time, he was a big farmer. They would seed a lot of land. Of course, there was 8 boys in my dad's family.
Any girls?
And 3 girls that I got to know, and then 2 of them 2 girls, I guess, had passed away in infancy, so I never knew about them.
How about your grandmother Magdalena? What type of a person was she?
Oh, they were beautiful people. She was also a wonderful person. I mean, I really can't say that they were ever cross or anything like that. Just strict, and I could see with that many children around. See, my mother came from the second family too, so there was 8 or 9 of them, and same way on my dad's side, and so they had to be strict.
So, let's talk about your parents for a little bit. Start with your dad. What was his name?
William Jr.
I was just gonna ask if he was a junior.
Yeah. He carried that as long as he lived. Willie Worth Jr.
When was he born? Do you remember? Or do you know?
No, I don't.
When you think back about your father, can you describe him as a person? What type of a father was he?
He carried the same traits. Strict with whatever he did, and he always walked with a limp, and he, I guess when he was still at home, he had an accident with a horse one time when he was riding, and I guess he really never did much to as far as doctor and stuff like that, and so he walked with a limp all the time. But it never seemed to. He never seemed to bother as far as working. He'd get awfully tired and stuff like that. Of course, we all do. And we never had too big a farming operation, but it was enough to carry us through. My folks bought their farm that they had right when the dirty 30s hit, and then they had borrowed money from Federal Land Bank, and when that hit, well, there were no crops or anything, and so they would just scrimp and save everything all year long. And the people at Federal Land Bank said, don't worry about the principal, just keep the interest paid so it doesn't get more and more. And they finally got it paid off. But after that, it was, I guess, a lesson that my dad learned, and I think it was too strict, because there would be land that would come up for sale around ours that would have fit in. He would not budge. He just said, I was in debt once and that's it. And he told me that, quite often we discuss about how things were, and he said when they went through that time with the Federal Land Bank, he said, we would scrimp and save all summer long. He said, sell eggs and cream and whatever we had so we could make that payment, he said. And we'd take it to town or take it into the office and make the payment, he said. And there wasn't even enough money left over to buy a box of apples, he said, and they sold for $1.50. So they knew what tough times were. And that was from I guess that dirty 30s hit around 1932 or something like that, and he said for 7 years they never had a crop. But he said we paid off the loan, he said, and eventually we had the land paid for.
Do you remember any part of the dirty 30s?
Not really.
Too young?
Too young, I guess.
Yeah. Do you remember your dad ever being under a lot of stress because of the dirty 30s when you were a kid?
I think so. He was the kind of a person, and I think I've probably got a little bit of that too. I don't like confusion. And I can still remember when we came through those years, and you plant every acre that you've got to plant with the hopes of making a little extra money or something like that. And then the land actually it got wore out because we didn't use fertilizer or anything like that back in those days. But then they came out with a program where you would make summer fallow, and that's you'd leave your land lay for a year and work it to keep the weeds and everything down and store moisture and whatever. And the first year we worked it all summer long, and then the following spring he planted it to wheat, and it was a beautiful crop on there, the best we had ever seen. And we were all through harvesting everything that we had except for this a piece of summer fallow ground. And we pulled up to the field about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and my dad, it was kind of laid down along a valley. My dad looked across it and he said, well, he said, it looks a little on the green side yet. He said, we'll just wait until tomorrow morning. We left the tractor and the binder set out there. And then we got a hailstorm that night, and when we come out the next morning, it looked like somebody had plowed that field. It was black. And there was wheat like this standing out there the day before. It would have been, I mean, back in those days, if you got 10, maybe 15 bushels an acre, that was classified as a good crop. And I know that there was 25 or 30 bushel an acre wheat setting there. And he went home and he went down the basement. We had a bed down there where we'd sleep once in a while. He went down there and he lay down in that bed, and he didn't come out for 2 days. Just I guess he could just see how that crop would run when we combine it or thrash it. And so never got it. There was a stretch down here practically every summer, about 5 miles wide and about 10 miles long. Just hail it out every year. And my dad would, as soon as he got through seeding, he'd go to the bank and buy hail insurance. And he said, and he used it at that time, he would take out $10 an acre. $10 an acre, he said. That way, if we do get hailed out, he said, at least I've got money to buy seed again. And if not, he said, then we can pay for the premium. But that's the way we were brought up.
Okay, Gorden, we were talking about your father. Let's actually, before we turn to your mother, let's talk about your father a little bit more. When your dad was upset, how would he express his anger towards you and your brother?
He didn't. You know, I can only remember one time that I got a spanking from my dad. And it was for my own good. We had, it must have been towards the end of the dirty 30s. I suppose I was about 6 or 7 years old, and our farm kind of sat up on a hill, and our well went dry. And so this was all part of this dirty business. And I can remember it was in July. It was hot and dry. There was no green grass around any place, except for one spot down below the hill, not too far from a lake. And so my dad came in, my mother was churning butter. And he came in and he said, I'm going to take the shovel and go down there and I'm going to start digging. He said, I think there's water under there. Otherwise that grass would be dried up like the rest of it. And so he went down there, and he dug down 4 feet, and water started coming in from the side of the hill. And so then we went, and it was a good strong vein of water, nice, good water. And so we made that hole 4 foot square and 8 feet deep. And then the water came in and it settled in there, and we had all kinds of water. But anyhow, then in the meantime we were set up on the hill with the windmill, but we needed something for the pump down below the hill, and so he bought a pump jack, and we had a little stationary engine on there that we would start it, and then it would pump the tank full of water, and then we'd go back down and shut it off. And I was old enough to go down and shut that engine off, and so he said, "Go down and shut the engine off. The tank is full. I can see it running over." And so I walked down to the well, and I was something like an engine fascinated me, And so I reached for the place where you shut it off, turned it off, and then it would just about stop, and then I'd open it up again and it would take off. And I was standing with my back towards the farm up there. And he had been watching me, and he come down there and he had picked up something, and he whopped me across my butt, and I turned around. He said, "When I send you down here to shut that engine off, that's exactly what I want you to do." He said, "You're going to get your hands in that flywheel there." And that's the only time I ever remember. He wasn't mad. He just, you don't do that.
More concerned about your safety.
Absolutely.
How about love? How did he express his love or affection?
Oh, I don't know. We would, a lot of times, we would, like when we'd be out cutting grain with the header or something like that, and then we'd load off the header box, and then by that time I was big enough to where I could handle the team with the header box. I mean, it didn't take much. They would more or less. And then once in a while, him and I would wrestle on the box, but it was more or less an even keel all the time. I mean, no, I don't think my father ever expressed anger towards his children, towards my brother and me. He would probably frown on some of the things that we did, and reprimanded us, but there was no such a thing as that my brother and I, that he beat up on us and stuff like that. That's just.
So when you'd wrestle with him, who would win?
Oh, I don't know. And then we went. The first time they took me to Harvey to the academy, we were about, I don't know, halfway up there, and I was sitting in the back seat, and my mother and my dad were in the front seat. And I said to my dad, "I think we should stop and wrestle again." But he never did.
So he was a farmer.
Yeah, we are.
What type of farmer was he?
Good farmer. The best of his ability, what he did with it.
Did he learn how to farm from his parents?
Yeah.
The land that he had, did he inherit that from his parents, or did he purchase
about half of it, and then there was also some of the land that he bought that he had the Federal Land Bank loan on. And then I want to say this before it slips my mind. There was a piece of ground that came up next to our farm for taxes, and so my dad and my uncle, they bought this piece of ground and they divided it. My dad took the east side because it was close to our farm, and my uncle took the west side. And my dad was in nursing home before he passed away. He was in there for, I think, 6-7 years, something like that. And he had gotten to the place where his mind wasn't clear at all anymore. And so how it started out was he was living in this house right next to it, to this one here. And I'd call him about once a week or so, and I'd say, "Dad, are you eating enough?" "Oh, yeah, I'm eating enough." But then my relatives would call down and they said, your dad isn't eating anymore. He's getting skinnier and skinnier. And so we came up to see him. And we stopped in Ashley and we called up here. I mean, we didn't want to just walk in on him. And he didn't answer the phone. And so we came on up, and usually when he was in the house, he'd even though he was in, he'd have the door locked. And so when we came, we stopped outside, and my wife and I went to the front door, and the front door was locked, and then we went around the back door, and it was unlocked. And so I just cautiously walked in, and when I came in the living room, then he was laying on the Davenport sleeping. And then so I just kind of took his shoulder and so that he'd know we were there. And then he looked up at me and he said, What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, we came up to see you." And so then he got up and we visited with him, and then I said, "Dad, you're looking awful skinny." He said, "I don't like to be fat." And that was one of his things in life. He never wanted to be fat. But anyhow, then I could see that there was something else wrong with him. So we were here with him for, I think, 2 or 3 days, and then my wife's mother lived in Bismarck at that time. She's passed away by now already too. And I said, "Well, we're going to go up and see Dernetta's mom, and then we'll be back in about a day or two." "Okay." So we went up there, and we had just barely got into where she was living, and then her telephone rang. And then it was my aunt. She called and she said, the neighbor lady came over to see your dad if he was okay, and he was laying behind the bed. He couldn't get up anymore. So we got back in the car and we came right back down here. And then I got him settled down, and then I laid on the Davenport right outside of the bedroom, and then at night he got up and he fell beside the bed again. He couldn't get up, and I said, "That's enough now." I said, "We're going to take you to the hospital." No. He said, I don't want to go to the hospital. I said, "Yes, you are. You're going there. You need help." And so I called the ambulance, and they came and got him and took him over to Michigan. And then I made arrangements for him to go to the nursing home. And when he got out, then he was in the hospital there for a few days and in swing bed, and then he ended up in the nursing home. But he, for some reason or other, he could never forgive me for putting him in the nursing home. He just said, "Yeah, you put me in here and then you left," he said, "and you never came back," he said. That was, every time I talked to him, and a lot of times I could tell that he didn't even know that we were visiting on the phone. And so then he ended up in the hospital again in about a year later. And then when he was in the hospital, they called down and said that your dad's in the hospital. So I called up right away to the hospital, and I just got a few words out of him, and that was it. And so then I just kept track of him just by calling the hospital, and then I think I visited with him once or twice on the phone. And then he went back to the nursing home again. And then they called and said that he was back in the nursing home. So I got on the phone and I called him right away. And I could tell that his mind was clearer. And so this went on for a couple of days, and every time I talked to him, he was making more sense and all that. And so I called him one morning, and then when I got through talking to him, then I called back to the nursing home and talked to the head nurse. And I said, what are you doing to my dad? And I could tell that was the wrong thing to say, because on the other end everything went. I said, don't get me wrong. I said, I just want to know what's going on. I said, my dad is starting to make sense when I talk to him. And she said, well, let me check his chart. And she said, the only thing different than what was been going on before, they've got him on a small dose of prednisone. And I said, well, what's prednisone? I said, is that something that's going to build him up for a while and then boom, everything's going to drop out from under him? And she said, no. The only thing that happens with prednisone is they start gaining weight. Well, I said, he can gain weight. He said, I said, he's so skinny. And she said, yeah, it won't hurt him. So this went on, and every time I talked to him, I mean, I could tell he was getting better and better. And towards last, we were visiting on the phone just like we are here. And then I had taken all his important papers from the land and all that. I took it along down to Texas with me when we left. And so I went through his papers, and here was that paper that they had made when they bought the land, my uncle and my dad. And so that evening I called him and I said, Dad, do you remember when you bought that door land? Oh, yes, he said, Fred Amon and I bought it, he said, and we took the east half and he took the west half. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. Let's have another question. So I said, do you remember what you paid for it? Oh, yeah. He told me right to the dollar what he paid for that land. And that's the kind of a mind he had until he passed away. I had never seen anybody come back like that. And my mother was the same way. She had her clear mind. I talked to her on Tuesday night, and when I talk with her, I always kid with her. On Wednesday night, she passed away, and her mind was just as clear as when we were growing up on the farm. Just, and there's so many older people, when they get to the place where they pass away, their mind is gone, and they just, not my parents.
When you think back on your mom, what type of a mother was she?
Wonderful. She was always give you I guess you'd call it the benefit of a doubt, and it would hurt her so much if something was wrong. She would just literally sit by the bed or whatever. And I had wonderful parents. I was lucky.
When your mom would get upset with you boys, how would she discipline you guys?
I don't ever remember that she did. I have often said I do not remember that my parents ever had a disagreement. I was 23 years old when I left home. And that they would ever have words or anything like that, never, never. I don't, it's just, that's the way it was. That's the surroundings I grew up in.
Do you know how they met?
No.
Were they born, or did they grow up near each other, or?
Yeah, well, my grandpa's farm was about 4 miles southwest of here, and my grandpa Kranzler's farm was about that far the other way. So, but somehow or other they found each other.
How would your mother show her affection toward you and your brother?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't. I mean, it was. I don't know. I guess it was just a straight through deal. I mean, there was never no really big high days or anything like that, you know. And
Were you close to her?
yeah.
What types of things would you do with her?
Oh, I don't know. Uh, she was somebody I could talk to and tell her my troubles.
What would the family do when they were done working on the farm in the evenings?
In the summertime, get your bath and go to bed. In the wintertime when the winds were howling and the snow was blowing, if you were lucky enough, you had the mail once a week or so, and you'd read all we always had the Farmer and the Dakota Farmer. Those two papers were always around. You read them from cover to cover. And then I remember one of them, I think it was the Farmer, always had a page in there for kids called Funland, and they had little puzzles in there and stuff like that we'd work with.
Were those free papers, do you know?
No, they were not. What the subscriptions cost, I have no idea.
So your parents came from large families. Did
Yeah.
you know your aunts and uncles?
Yeah, most of them. Yeah, all of them.
Were you close to any of them?
Oh, I don't know. No, I don't know. I guess they were just part of the family. I mean,
Would you ever have big family gatherings where all the aunts and uncles would come together?
oh, I don't know. Just not really. I mean, it was. I can remember one time when we all got together on my mother's side here in town, but that's been so long ago that.
You mentioned that your dad would occasionally wrestle with you. Would your mother ever play with you?
Not those kind of games. Hey, she was a lady. We were taught to have respect for women.
Did you have any type of games that you would play with your mom?
Oh, maybe something like checkers or those board games or stuff like that. But
Did you have a few board games when you were growing up?
yeah, we had a Monopoly game, and I know one time the local grocery store here, they had prizes for something, and one was a game. It was about this wide, about this long. They called it shoot a loop, and it was like these machines that they have now where you big marble like that drops in and then you shoot it and it counts gling, 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 gling. Well, anyhow, this had little loops like that, so if the marbles came down right, they would land in there and they had scores, you know. And then I remember we had an anagram game too, letters. And then I had there was another marble game. You would put the marble in there and then you'd pull back on the little lever that was spring loaded and it would hit the marble and it would go up and around and come around and it would go into different holes, so each one had a score, so you could keep a score. And we had some puzzles too. That I never liked puzzles. I still don't. You don't make enough headways. Not fast enough.
Not like wrestling, huh?
No. And we had a pickup sticks. Do you know what those are?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had one of those. And I remember one time I got some modeling clay too. But and then of course when I was maybe about 6 or 7 years old, and at Christmas time, the local store down there, they had this yellow and red truck. It was about this long, about this tall. Just the most beautiful thing you ever saw. And I told my mom, I want that for Christmas. But it never showed up.
So did you get Christmas gifts when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, so I mean they were usually shirt or pants or something like that. But practical gifts, you know, something that we could use. And then they would always, I don't know, I suppose maybe from the money that my mother got for the eggs, I can remember that we would always have some walnuts, peanuts, and a few candy and stuff like that. And that was bought before Christmas, and then usually about a week or so before Christmas, then she would bring it out, and we would have not an overabundance, but enough to let us know that there was something different.
So did you have a Christmas tree?
No.
Any decorations at all?
No.
Did the school put on a program?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Big time. We would, this little country school, you know, and we'd practice for weeks and weeks, you know, get everything down as well as we could. And then the night of the Christmas program, every man, woman, dog, and children would crowd into that little schoolhouse, and it would be hot in there. And we would put on our plays, and then of course we had all exchanged names, you know, and then we would get our little gifts, and the teacher would usually buy us each a comb or a pencil or something like that. And then one year, we were all set for our Christmas program. Then our teacher got sick. And we had practiced and practiced. And so we'll just forget about our Christmas program. And the neighbors and everybody, no, you can't do that. You always put on such a good program. So we had our Christmas program in March. But it went over just as good as if we would have had it at Christmas time. That was when people stuck together. I mean, that was the binding glue for the neighborhoods. One for all and all for one.
How about the Christmas dinner? What type of dinner would your mom put together?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe a duck or a goose or something like that, and then dressing, and she would always, at Thanksgiving most of the time, she would buy the raw cranberries and cook them up, and maybe a freezer full of ice cream and stuff like that. But
Did you guys celebrate Christmas Eve at all?
no, no.
Was Thanksgiving celebrated in any way at school?
Oh, we would make cutouts out of construction paper and stuff like that. And the teacher used to have patterns, and then one of the teachers had stencils, they called them. I don't know if you know what they are. And they were big ones for a month, like December or January, what. And she would put these stencils on the paper on the blackboard, and then she would take the eraser, the chalk dust, and go across this. And then when she take it off, then there were all these little lines, and then she would take colored chalk, and then she would outline that. That was that was one of the. I just couldn't hardly wait for another month to come around because she would do that.
Do you remember what teacher that was?
No, I can't remember.
How about Valentine's Day? Was that celebrated?
Oh yeah, we had big Valentine box, and we'd make Valentines in school and put them in the box, and then usually the day before Valentine's Day, we'd open up or if Valentine came on Sunday, so we'd have it on Friday afternoons and open up the Valentine box and hand out all the Valentines. Everybody had made Valentines for everybody else, and yeah, fun.
Were there any other holidays that were celebrated in school?
No, I can remember we had Friday afternoon. That was from last recess on. I think recess came around 2:30 or 3 o'clock or something like that, and then we'd have after recess. During recess everybody would be assigned either clean the blackboard or sweep the floor or something, and then after that we'd have our YCL, we called the Young Citizens League. There was an organization that all of the country schools had, and I think they had it in town here too. And I even carried that through to when I was teaching. But anyhow, we'd have about 15 minutes of that. It was quite we took it real serious. We'd get up and we'd say the pledge to the flag and then YCL pledge, and then we'd have a business meeting and what little business there was, and then after that it would be about half an hour, 45 minutes of drawing, and that's the way we spent Friday afternoons. And I can remember how we looked for that. That was fun.
I've never heard of the YCL before.
Oh yeah, Young Citizens League, and I can remember when I taught school. I taught a country school up northeast of Napoleon, and I had a young, I call him gentleman. We're still close. When we come to Bismarck, that's where they live now. If we can possibly arrange it, we get together and go out for a meal or something like that. It was his brother, the boy, and he had two sisters. And so the three of them and my wife and I, we usually we fix it so we go have a meal together, or when they have a family reunion, we get an invitation to come to their family reunion. It's those relationships, I wouldn't take anything for them.
You mentioned that the YCL had its own pledge. Do you remember what the pledge was?
No, I don't remember anymore. But anyhow, this young guy the boy that he was in the 4th grade at that time, and he wasn't shy. He could get up and he could make a talk and all that. So I wrote out a talk for him, and then we had county YCL at Napoleon. That's where the county's courthouse is at, and I forget where we had it, but anyhow, I wrote this out for him, and he took it and he practiced reading it and this and that, and then finally when that time come, and then he got up and he read it, and he was so proud of it that he could. That was another family. That was when Hilbert was this fellow's name. When he was born, his mother passed away of childbirth, and so his uncle and aunt moved in with their dad, and they raised those kids. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children. Hilbert was the baby, and they helped his dad to raise those kids, and they were shy. You go up there and visit them. They kind of hide behind the door, but just nice young people.
So did you teach right out of high school?
Yeah.
How long did you teach for?
4 years. Not all in one string. Well, maybe. Yeah, I guess I did. I taught school down here for 2 years. No, one school down here, 1 year, and then one out this way, and then 2 years up at Napoleon.
So when you think back to your childhood,
I don't think I ever was a child.
how close were you to your brother?
Not too awfully close. He was 6 years older than I am, and there was always, I don't know, a little rivalry between us.
What was his name?
Harold.
Let's see here. Oh yeah, we have it. 4th of July. We mentioned that the 3 churches in Streator, Blair, and Cullum would get together. But what types of things would you guys do for 4th of July?
Oh, we'd play baseball and some other games. I forget just exactly what they were. And then, of course, everybody brought food. It would be like a potluck, and there was always plenty of food to be had and at these times, and so I don't know. We just enjoyed getting away for the day, I guess. Oh, and then we'd always, as time went on, the older ones would get married, and then they would still keep coming back to the picnic for the 4th of July, and so it would always be the single guys would take on the married guys. There were some old grandpas, they could hardly run, but they would.
That's classic. Were there any fireworks back then?
No. Well, not at these picnics, but Wishick usually always put on fireworks, and that was one thing that my dad would take us to. I mean, and I got to like fireworks, and I still like them today. I like Christmas lights, and I like fireworks. I guess it's the color. But fireworks, man, you should have been here for the display that we put on here in Lair.
Did you have a nice one?
Fantastic. It's far superior to anything around here.
So your dad would take you to Wishick to view the fireworks.
And we, they usually had a 4th of July celebration, like foot races for the kids and watermelon eating contests and pie eating contests and stuff like that. And I can still remember one year I got up there for the watermelon eating contest and I got first prize.
How much watermelon did
I
you
don't
eat?
remember.
So, did they make pickled watermelon back then?
Oh yeah, yeah. You like them? How come?
I don't like watermelon and it tastes like
Oh,
a pickle.
oh man.
I love pickles, but
That's good stuff.
that's the only German Russian food I haven't acquired a taste for.
How about smoked goose legs and goose breasts?
A smoked goose breast. I don't think I've ever had legs, but I like
The
legs.
drumstick. I mean,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
drumstick,
I
not the
love.
legs, the drumstick.
Yeah.
We would always have that out. My mother would always raise 20, 25, 30 geese, and most of those got butchered, and ducks, and they would take the not not the legs, but the drumsticks and that, and my dad would put them in brine and for I don't know how long, and then he would take and smoke them. And we had this little tiny attic upstairs, and that's where he would hang all this meat up there. And then in the wintertime we'd go up and bring down a drumstick or a thigh or whatever it was, and that wasn't cooked or anything like that, but we'd take it and take the knife and slice it off and eat it.
So you had geese on the farm.
Oh yeah, geese and ducks and chickens.
Okay.
Always and turkeys some years too. And my mother always raised big time, because in the fall of the year, then she would, when well, I suppose maybe in September or so, then she would take the chickens that she wouldn't keep and sell them. And that was extra income. The eggs that we got from the chickens that were laying, she'd take them to the store and trade them for groceries. And a lot of times she'd get more for the eggs than she had groceries, which nowadays would never happen. And I can still remember then one year, for some reason or other, she didn't raise any chickens. She'd always order them, the baby chicks, and raise them. And then when they were ready to butcher, then she would start butchering little roosters. And I guess we took the cream to town or something, and she bought one at the store, a chicken that was ready to put in the kettle. And then when my dad came, he looked in the back. He said, "I see you bought a chicken." And my mother said, "Yeah." She said, "I bought a chicken." She said, "I've sold a lot of them already too." So, but that we always had chickens big time.
So did you ever go hunting when you were a kid?
No,
How about trapping?
I did some trapping, weasels and mink and stuff like that, but I have yet to shoot my first animal. Life is life, people.
So when you went trapping, how would you trap? What would you use to trap the weasels?
They were, they'd open up like this, and then there was a little flipper that you brought over, and then you'd bring a deal up, and that would lock in there, and then if anything stepped on this round thing, and then go like that, and the animal was caught. And then if we were really, really serious about like mink or weasels or something like that, like butchering time, that was when they'd butcher the geese and that stuff, then we'd take some of that skin and stuff that they would, and we'd tie it to the barbed wire and set the trap right underneath there, and they'd try and go up there and get that and step in the trap, and you'd have them.
So why would you trap weasels and mink?
Sell them for them. You'd skin them and send the skins to Sears and Roebuck. And muskrats, that was big game. we'd back in those days, there were all these lakes. They would have muskrat piles on them, and when hunting season opened up for muskrats, we'd go and open up those piles, and the water was open underneath. The muskrats would come up in there, and you'd set that trap in there, and just in a certain way, you knew how. And if the lake was big enough to where you'd go around and set traps, you could go practically all day long, and every time you'd come back, there was a muskrat in there, and you just keep on going. And I suppose we probably got $1.50 for muskrats at that time. And, oh yeah, hunting was big deal in this country. Rabbit drives. They'd get about 50 neighbors together or so, and there were so many rabbits all over, and they would just string out in a field or something like that, and then they would just start walking down the field, and as the rabbits would come out, they would shoot them, and they'd end up with hundreds of them.
What would they do with them?
Take them in and sell them. That's when people were still buying fur. Then there was an old fellow that had a cream station in town here, and he also bought rabbits in the wintertime, and so he was getting kind of old, and so these two guys they brought their rabbits in to him to sell, and he would just open the back door in his cream station and throw them out there on the pile. He had this big pile. The one guy would be out there and bring the rabbits around and sell them to him again.
Double the pay.
Another trick they played on him one time. He was known to have quite a bit of cash money on him all the time, and in the summertime, then he had a little potbelly stove in his cream station, and some of the guys knew that he had this money in there, so he went home for dinner, but left the cream station unlocked because farmers would bring cream in, and then when he'd come back, then he would test it and so on and so forth. They took this money out and they put some paper in there and they lit it when they knew he was coming, and he saw that there was smoke coming out the chimney. And so he come on the run, my money, my money.
So when you were growing up, would you ever play tricks on people?
No.
Or get into mischief?
No.
Why don't I believe you?
Man, I've been perfectly honest with you. Why would I change? No, I
smile right now that I'm not sure that I know.
I really don't remember that I ever.
Okay. What about fairs, like town fairs or county fairs?
Yeah.
Did you ever go to any of those?
We had, yeah, we usually always, we would go to the fair one day or so. But anyhow, at one time we had a harvest celebration here in town, and they were going to have prizes for the biggest cabbages and all that stuff. And I was hauling grain to town with the tractor and with the wagon, and I come through the yard at our place there, and my mother come out from the garden, and she had this big head of cabbage with her, and she showed it to me, and I said, let me take that up there. I said, I will put it on display. Oh no, I said, yeah, I'm going to take it along. So I brought it up here, and when they come to judge it, she got the blue ribbon for it. Was she ever happy? Like she had won $1 million.
Was that in Lair that they'd have those?
Yeah, in Lair. Oh, years ago we used to put on good celebrations here. We had the guy that run the general store, and then the guy that run run the bank. They were the head push all the time, and they would put on all kinds of celebrations then.
So tell me what Lair was like when you were a kid.
Oh my. I'd go to town Wednesday night, Saturday nights. We'd walk the streets from one end of town to the other. And we had, you want to know about the business places?
Yeah.
We had two implement dealers that I know, a John Deere and an International. And we had 3 service stations. We had a bank. We had 2 or 3 grocery stores, butcher shop, cafe, and always never less than 3 churches. Now we've got 5 in town here. And elevators, we always had no less than 2 or 3. And a barber shop. Of course, there was always the drinking establishments, 2 of them, 1 in each corner. And I don't know, hardware store and dry goods. And back in 47, they put running water and sewer in town. And 47 and 48. And then I can remember we had the Golden Jubilee in 47 or 48, something like that. And then they would have they would bring cattle to town and have a parade. You know, I know my uncle had Angus cattle, and then his neighbor had shorthorn cattle, and they would have them tame enough where they could walk them in the parade. And
do you know how many people were in Lair when you were growing up?
This is just a guess, but I would say in the neighborhood of 450, 300, 450, something like that.
And how many are there today, do you know?
Last census was 105.
Okay, Gordon, since you grew up during the time period of World War II, do you want to tell us how that affected your family?
Yeah, I can still remember the first radio that my dad bought had a shortwave in it, a shortwave setup. And every once in a while, Hitler would get on and give a speech in Germany. And when that came on, my grandpa would come to our house and he would listen. Both my dad and my grandpa, they would listen to that speech that Hitler made. And my grandpa would always, he just couldn't feature how a guy like that could get into power. From nothing, I mean, and all at once here he rules and kills people, and oh goodness. And then I can remember, like when we were going to in our school, that's when they had war bonds and stamps, saving stamps and stuff like that. And the teacher we had one year, she started us all out with a savings book with, I think, 2 or 3 stamps in it that she had bought, and then she gave each one of us and encouraged us to keep on buying these stamps and filling the book. And I guess at that time when you had a book full of stamps, you could turn it in for a bond or whatever it was, and then they would go around the country and pick up all the scrap metals, scrap tires, and stuff like that, and they would use that for the war effort. They would melt those old tires down and melt the steel down, and then if you've probably never thought about this, but you'll never find a 1943, 1944, or a 1945 car anyplace, because they had all these automobile factories switch over to building war material. And then, of course, every family was issued rationing stamps. Everything was rationed. Shoes, meat, coffee, sugar, you name it, it was rationed. And so, like in our family, we didn't drink coffee, and so my mother and her sister, we would give them their coffee stamps, and they would give us something else. And then every farmer would butcher the meat and everything like that. Well, they finally come out, they were going to stop that. And so they would butcher at night and hang sheets across the windows so nobody could see, and that's how they would supply the family with food. Shoes, you could I don't know how many pair a year you could get, but they were rationed. You had shoes that were rationed, tires, and then gas was rationed. I can still remember they had A, B, and C stamps, and each one A was for, like, if you would just want to go out for a Sunday afternoon drive or something like that, and that's about all the gas you could get. And then B gave you a little bit more, and C, I guess, was for agriculture. And so you would put those stamps up on your windshield. And then they came out with you had to buy a stamp for your car. It was an extra tax on your car. And I can remember my grandpa was living in town already. He didn't have a car anymore. He was so patriotic that he still bought a stamp for his car. The car was out on the farm. And I can remember when the men from around this area, when they were old enough to go to the army, the train would come through here, and they would get in the cars, and everybody would go down there. Not everybody, but at least the relatives and close friends would go there and wave them goodbye, and then most of or all of those. See, they would go like to Fargo or there's a camp was a camp in Minnesota for a physical. Then they would come back home, and then if they passed the physical, then they would get drafted into the army. And I even got in on that physical. That was in 54. I went to Fargo, and then when I came back, then I got notification that I had passed it, and I had seeded some land down here with my dad, and this was in just shortly before harvest. And so I went down to the draft board nationally, and I said, well, how soon will I be going? Not will I be going, that was you'll be going. And so she looked at the sheet, and she said, she gave me a date. So I went home, and I sold we combined it, and I sold all my grain and everything. And then that day came when I was supposed to go, and I didn't get a notification, and so I waited for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I went down to the draft board again, and I said, am I going to go or am I not? So she looked in the file and she said, you're way in the back now. She said, we've got enough volunteers. You won't be going for a long, long time. And I never did go.
And that was for the Korean War at that time? In 1950?
Yeah, it must have been.
Did your brother have to register
No.
for the war?
Yeah, well, we registered to it, but
When you're ready. Do you remember when you first heard about Pearl Harbor?
oh yeah, like if it were today.
Where were you?
We were my folks and I, we went to a funeral in Ashley. And then when we came home, this was on the 7th of December. And when we came home, we turned on the radio for the news, and that's all you could hear was that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and then the next day Roosevelt come out and they declared war on Japan.
You were, what, about 10, 11 at that time?
Well, I was born in 31, and this was
41, right?
yeah, about 10. And I can still remember the day when Kennedy got shot.
Where were you when that happened?
Just like if it happened this afternoon. We were living in Pierce, South Dakota, and I had gone home for dinner. And when I come back I worked in a service station. And when I come back, they had the radio on, and of course that was all that was on. And I just went outside and I cried, and I said, it just can't be in this day and age. But it was. And then of course they had that, right away they swore, what's his name? His wife just passed away, the president. Who? Johnson. And then I remember it just like it was this afternoon. Some of those things in your life, you just do not wipe those off your mind. Never.
How about when the World Trade Center was attacked?
Oh, yeah. I sat here in the morning, I was watching the news, and then they had just had a station identification advertisement, and then they come back on and they showed this thing. And I thought they were showing some advertisement for a movie or something. And then that's when they said that this World Trade Center had been bombed. Oh, goodness. You just, I don't know. Although I wasn't there and involved in it, yet it's part of my America. It's part of my America, and we grew up, when we grew up at home. If anybody would have ever said anything about the flag, that it was, or burned a flag or something like that, there would have been no way I would have ever stood around and let them do something like that if I could have prevented it. Because we just grew up in an era you just respect that kind of stuff. I can remember my uncle and aunt. He was a Baptist minister, and then they went to Canada. And when they came home for a visit, at that time I had a car already, and I had put the license on the back, and I had these little flags for. They went through the license, and you put a nut on the back. And when my aunt saw those, she literally got down there and kissed that little flag. That's how glad she was to be back in the United States.
I forgot one thing before I ask my concluding questions. One thing that we didn't talk about that I did want to get into this interview was how you met your wife.
She was actually my girlfriend's best friend.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting story.
And they lived in McCluskey. And so my my other girlfriend, she strayed. And so by that time she was in Bismarck. She worked in Bismarck. She stayed with her brother, and she worked in Bismarck. And we had oh, through the church too, we had a play period in the evening. And then we were playing tag or whatever, and anyhow, she fell, and I fell on top of her. And then she was shy, awfully shy. And so we went home. I took her home then. No, first we stopped at the cafe, and I bought her a bottle of orange pop, and then I took her home, and I said, well, where do you live? And she told me where she lived. So we went down the street on by her place, and then we went around the corner. She said, no, that's not where I live. So we stopped, and then we got better acquainted, and that's the way. Then it didn't take very long. Then I brought her down here to introduce her to my folks, and the rest is history.
How old were you?
I was 23, I think, at that time. She was elderly. She was 17.
Ancient.
But the thing of it is, she grew up, and her grandparents raised her, and and she never knew that her mother was not her sister. She thought she was born out of wedlock, and then her mother, she always thought that Lily was your sister. And so then when her grandparents passed away, then her mother wanted to claim her, and my wife, she wouldn't go with her. And so her uncle provided a place for her. They had 3 boys, and at McCluskey. And so then, of course, we got to know each other, and we started going together in, I don't know, about September, something like that. And then in January, the following January, then we went up to her uncle's place at McCluskey. And of course, you know how young people are, bashful and so on and so forth. So we sat there and visited for a while, and pretty soon Reuben's wife, her aunt, she said, well, I'm going to bed. And she went to bed, and then I said to her uncle, I said, I've got a question I want to ask you. I said, we'd like to get married. And then he kind of, well, she's awfully young, but he said, my mother was young too when she got married, and so, Leah, come on down here. And so Leah come down from upstairs, and she said, Ternetta and Gord want to get married. I don't know if she said anything or not, but anyhow, then we started making wedding plans, and the following 10th of June we got married.
What was your wedding like?
Big time. No, we had our wedding in not in our church because it was too small, but we rented the one next door. It was a bigger church, and she's got a big lot of relatives, and I've got a lot of relatives, and so we had that church pretty well filled up. And then we had a reception down at the Legion Hall, and it was, at that time there was no such a thing as catering a wedding. All the aunts and cousins, everybody brought food, and I think there was more food there than what. It was in 53.
How long have you been married?
In 53, we're on our 53rd year, 54th year.
Congratulations.
And then when we had our 50th wedding anniversary, the kids put on a wedding anniversary for us out here at this tabernacle. Man, oh man, we had a ball out there. It was a Hawaiian theme, and
the last question I had for you was, why did you want to participate today?
why?
Yeah.
Well, when I first heard about this Germans from Russia, I thought that if somebody was going to give a big long speech up there and talk about that, well then it passed it. I don't know, were you there?
Nope. I work with Acacia.
But anyhow, they passed out these questionnaires, and I guess that's how it really got started. Our daughter-in-law lives in Oklahoma City. She's wild on this Germans from Russia. In fact, I got some literature here. I looked at it the other day again. No, this is your letter. No, this isn't it either. Where is it? No, this isn't it either. It's around here someplace. But anyhow, there's different families, that they have in that stuff that she sends. Well, if you don't know the people, it really doesn't interest you that much. But when she comes up here, she goes out to the cemetery and goes all the way through that stuff and out there. And then she comes back and asks questions. Some of them I can answer and some I can't. Because that cemetery out here, that was established way back in the early 1900s. And there's a lot of people I know out there or knew out there, but there's some that I don't.
Well, that should do it for us, I think. Thank you.